Hey everybody, Paul from Evo here. We're going to show installing our high-speed compression base valve to a pair of Ducati DesertX forks. This kit only requires taking apart the left fork leg. However, we do recommend opening up both fork legs and draining the original factory fluid, replacing it with fresh fluid as well as seals and bushings while you're in there if the bike has a bunch of miles on it. Also, as a reminder, for different riders of different weights, we have our own made in the USA wound fork springs specifically for the DesertX that do not require any modifications or adapters to install. Thanks for watching. To fully understand the changes we're making, we're removing the stock compression base valve where no oil can actually flow through it during the compression cycle. All dampening is occurring through the mid-speed and low-speed circuits. We're removing this and adding in our new high-speed compression circuit that does add oil flow. Oil will flow during compression through the port here and out the port here, and this is shim dampened, and the setting we give you has been determined to work well for most applications on the DesertX. And then in rebound, this check valve will open similar to the stock one. So what we are doing is we're adding an extra level of tuning capability to the fork. This provides a smoother ride and a little bit better tracking and dials out some inherent weaknesses in the stock DesertX fork. Tools required to do this fix are a shaft clamp for the cartridge, Racetech part number TFCH3, 8mm hex, rubber strap wrench, 14mm wrench, 19mm wrench, an adjustable wrench. This is for removing the stock base valve, or it's an 18mm, and a 24mm wrench for the fork cap. I have a special plastic one so I don't leave any witness marks. And last is an oil level measuring tool. The first step in the process is to remove the fork cap of the compression leg. In the case of the DesertX, the compression leg is the left leg that my customer has labeled for me. To do so, if you don't have special tools, a rubber strap wrench works well to grab the fork tube itself. Take your 24mm wrench, I'm using this plastic one, and simply loosen the fork cap. Another way you can loosen the fork cap easily is by loosening the upper triple clamp bolts, leaving the lower triple clamp bolts tight, and turning the fork cap. There should be enough space to get in there with the wrench on the bike. Next, we'll drain the oil and proceed to remove the cartridge. All right, so we've drained our oil. Just gonna drop that to expose the spring. Place downward pressure so you can expose this nut. Place your 14mm wrench here on that nut. Then take your cap wrench and loosen that. Once you get a certain amount of loose, you should be able to do it just by hand. Place pressure on the spring so you can keep that wrench engaged. From there, you can pop off your cap, pull the spring out, put that in your drain pan, and we'll go on to the next step. All right, our next step is pulling the cartridge out, which is held in by a single 8mm hex bolt here. One of the things I wanted to highlight is techniques to keep the cartridge from spinning. If you don't have a fancy cartridge holding tool, one of the techniques is to pull out while placing kind of a side load on the cartridge, and that'll give some grab to the bolt when you're hitting it with an impact. The other thing you can do is take the spring and put it back in and push down on the spring, placing pressure against the spring seat, which will then put pressure here, allowing the bottom of the cartridge to grab so that the bolt can then be removed easily. All right, I think this time we're going to use the spring technique. So I've slid the spring back in. I'm going to hold on to it, place pressure on it. Then I'm going to put my impact in the bolt hole. We're going to hit it. And that should cause the whole thing to then slide out. nice and easy. It is good to use an impact gun like this. Just makes it easy to get the initial part of the bolt started. When you go to reinstall it later, do not apply a thread lock to that bolt, otherwise you're not getting your cartridge out ever again. Okay, now we have our cartridge clamped into the vise with our shaft clamp, and we're going to heat this in and pull out the base valve. Heat it up a little bit. It'll take a lot longer to heat up, but for the purpose of this video and brevity, I have already preheated it. Take your adjustable wrench, maybe a bigger one than I showed originally, and loosen that. Again, it is an 18, not a 19. We chose 19 on our kit just because that's a far more common tool for a tool kit. Let's switch back to the other one. We'll spin this off real quick after we move our fork leg out of the way. Got too many forks in my draining bench right now. Pull out the base valve. Drop it into your parts bin. And then next, we're just going to simply slide the new base valve in place. There's no real need to put any thread lock on it. If you choose to do so, just use a small amount of blue removable strength should you ever need to take it apart. Just makes your life easier. So spin it in place with your 19 millimeter wrench. Spinning, we're spinning, we're spinning. I don't have an exact torque value, but nice and snug. Don't over tighten. Makes your life easy later on. There we go. We've now installed our Evo high-speed compression base valve to our DesertX cartridge. From here, you can take the cartridge, reinsert it into the fork leg, and fill with oil to the appropriate level, which we will cover in some future steps. Now that we have inserted the base valve into the cartridge, we now will slide the cartridge back into the fork tube, and then we're going to insert the bottom bolt. I do use an impact. I use one that's not terribly strong. It's a 3/8 drive, but it's just not a very powerful one. And usually I like to just kind of slowly put the bolt in till it bottoms, and then I'll just hit it real quick, just a quick couple ugga-duggas. And that's all I do. I don't want to over tighten anything or strip anything. Next, we'll move on to setting the oil level. All right, cartridge is installed. Let us set the oil height. We're going to set it by height, not volume. If you do need a rough measurement, it's about 500 milliliters to start out with. Start out by pouring slowly. We are using a 5-weight fluid. The book says 7, but we've been using 5-weight, and it seems to work fairly well, plus it's commonly available. And then, like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a good idea to dump the oil out of both forks and replace it with fresh fluid when you're doing any service work. That way both sides are completely fresh. We don't have a mixed maintenance cycle. What we're looking for during the bleeding process is some resistance. You can definitely tell a well-bled cartridge versus one that's not. In this case, I've got a little resistance while pushing. If there was air in here, it may jump quickly. It's a good idea to cycle it a few times. Pour oil slowly, as it will take a little bit for all the oil to get to the bottom. Once we've done Dumped all that oil in. We're going to set the oil height. I run anywhere between 95 and 100 millimeters. For this fork, I'm going to use 100 millimeters. So I've preset my Racetech oil level tool. We'll stick it in there, into the fork, bottom the face there, and pull out any of the excess fluid. In my case, I measured it pretty accurately, so there isn't a whole lot extra. Next, we'll install the spring. For this set of forks, we are going to install a heavier set of fork springs. So the spring in the foreground is your stock spring. It's about a 0.60 kilograms per millimeter spring rate. And the spring we're going to install is a 0.64. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is a set of springs I've had made specifically for the DesertX. The reason I had this done is at the top of the spring, you can see there's this odd taper, and that is so that the fork preload, basically preload adjuster will fit onto the spring. And so if you had a straight set of springs, you may need some sort of adapter, which may involve some lathe work or friend with a lathe. Next, to install the spring, pull the dampening rod up and then slide your new spring over the dampening rod. And an easy trick to feed the dampening rod through is take your 13 millimeter wrench, stick it here just below the jam nut, and just simply spin the spring down until you can grab it with your fingers. And then from there, pull that wrench out, pull the spring down, and drop your fork cap in place, enough to start the threading process. All right, so we've done that, just enough to get it started. We're going to pull down, exposing the jam nut, stick our 14 millimeter wrench in place. We will continue to tighten down the fork cap with our 24 millimeter socket. Kind of fumbling this, trying to do it nicely for the camera, but that's how it goes when you're filming things. We'll tighten this up. Refer to the manual for the correct torque spec. There we go, torque to spec. Pull that out. Make sure the fork cap and preload adjuster all key together properly. And now you can screw the fork cap into the fork tube. If you need to do the final snugging once the fork is on the bike, that's a good way to do it. Just make sure the lower triple clamp is tightened, and the upper triple clamp is loosened so that you can actually spin the fork cap. All right, folks, we've completed our high-speed compression base valve installation on our Ducati DesertX fork. Fresh oil as well as heavier fork springs. You're ready to ride. So as always, have fun, be safe, and thanks for watching.